You did some time in the cat jail for less time. You didn't like the way your tan was this morning.
Is this thing on?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
You're welcome.
Guitar up.
1,
Turn
2,
that guitar
3.
up.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. I'm Redbeard, bringing you the stories behind the making of the greatest rock albums in history. Today, we'll go in the studio for the 20th anniversary of the album that has remained on the charts longer than any album in history.
I'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
Fear and love and hope and anxiety and hatred and pain, religion and authority that impinged upon our lives at the time and had done through our childhoods, and that somehow that could be turned into a record that was about the potential that we have for being human and humane and fulfilling our potential as human beings, but that that potential is eclipsed often by negativity. This is Roger Waters in the studio for the 20th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon.
Coming up, the story behind the making of Dark Side of the Moon. I'm Redbeard. We'll be right back in the studio after this.
Hello, this is David Gilmour of Pink Floyd.
And I'm Nick Mason, and we're in the studio for the celebration of the 20th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon.
And I'm Redbeard. In the first 3 months of 1973, the Vietnam War ended. Lyndon Johnson, Noel Coward, and Picasso all died. Marlon Brando rejected an Oscar, and Washington Post staff reporters Woodward and Bernstein were looking into a puzzling burglary at the Democratic National Headquarters in an office hotel complex called the Watergate. And English art rockers Pink Floyd quietly released an album called Dark Side of the Moon. It's an album that, appropriately enough, begins and ends with the sound of a heartbeat. Dark Side of the Moon has survived the test of time like no other record ever made. When it was released in March 1973, it was a work of unprecedented musical scope. The atmosphere of Dark Side of the Moon was dark and dreamlike, punctuated by startling sound effects, by clocks and bells, and the eerie sound of distant laughter. Roger Waters, who wrote all of the lyrics for Dark Side of the Moon, said it was an album about, and we quote, all the things that drive people mad. Who could have guessed that an album like that would become the longest-running success story in the history of recorded music? Dark Side of the Moon has been on the album charts for nearly 750 weeks, almost 15 consecutive years. That's 5 years longer than any other album of any kind. Before Dark Side of the Moon's release, there had been nothing to indicate Pink Floyd was on the verge of such stunning commercial success. Waters and guitarist Syd Barrett, school chums from Cambridge, England, formed the band in 1965, naming it after a couple of old Georgia bluesmen, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. There were some British hit singles in 1967 written by Barrett, but his erratic behavior made it impossible for Syd to stay in the band. And in 1968, after just one album, Syd Barrett was replaced on guitar by another Cambridge schoolmate, David Gilmour, who joined keyboardist Rick Wright, drummer Nick Mason, and bass player, vocalist, lyricist Roger Waters.
I always think that Echoes was the forerunner of all this stuff. Listening back to it, the lyrics that are in Echoes are like, two strangers passing in the street, by chance two passing glances meet, and I am you and what I see is me. It's the connection that is still fundamental to everything that I do between me and you that then became involved in Dark Side of the Moon. It's that fundamental attempt to connect with somebody else, which was, in terms of lyrics anyway, was appearing in Echoes. And it's something that we all have to learn. Most of us learn it the hard way. Yeah, it would be good if we could produce a society where we helped our children to learn it the easy way. It's interesting that the Archbishop of York yesterday, it was reported on the front page of the Times, London Times. He's finally come to the conclusion that what's largely creating the problems that we face socially in England now is the fact that our politics foster a competitive society, where we encourage our children to believe in a dog-eat-dog philosophy, and then wonder why they A, commit crimes, and B, grow up rather unhappy. It is the great question that needs unravelling before the millennium, hopefully, and that is what lies in the gap between the high ideals enshrined and embodied in the American Constitution and the reality of life in the United States. What is in that chasm? When we need to find what it is and somehow bridge it.
First, drummer Nick Mason, and then guitarist-vocalist David Gilmour of Pink Floyd.
I think part of it was there probably was a leap forward in technology. I mean, over the sort of last 20 years or whatever, there's virtually every year there's been some fairly big development in recording technology, whether it's been from 2-track to 4-track or 4-track to 8-track and so on. And I think we were sort of there at the right moment for some advantages at that sort of level. Certainly there's a lot of crossfading and overdubbing that was available to us on Dark Side that perhaps hadn't been there before.
I think we'd got to a point musically with Echoes where we were very happy with what we were doing, musically speaking, and I think Roger made a sort of quantum leap forward at that point into trying to make the lyrics and things, which he was just hinting at on one or two of the things on Meddle and the Obscured by Clouds album. And he made really, I would have to say, a quantum leap forward in his lyrical output to help us with the state of the music that we were at just prior to that with Echoes, to help us go into that and make this balanced record, which really brought the lyrics up to the quality of the music and turned the whole thing into a much more rounded, balanced thing that we were all very, very happy with.
Even before Dark Side of the Moon's release in 1973, Pink Floyd could sell out concerts in North America and Europe based largely on their wild light show and quadraphonic sound concerts, where Jimi Hendrix would hump and then burn his guitar, and Mick Jagger danced like James Brown. Well, Pink Floyd just kind of stood there. Here's Roger Waters.
None of us is a showman in the same way that Mick Jagger is, or certainly that Hendrix was. I think we were all, by comparison with either of those rather extrovert performers, we were all kind of rather shy and embarrassed, I suppose you could say. So maybe it was a kind of a hiding thing. Peter Gabriel's a bit like that, but he does this kind of strange Jekyll and Hyde thing. He's very quiet and unassuming off stage, but then when he gets onto the stage, his conviction in his own performance seems to take over. And he develops a theatricality which is not apparent if you sit and talk to him. I don't know. None of us could do what Hendrix did or do what Jagger did, so we did something else, I suspect. I think what was important about those shows at that time for us was that I very much wanted to stop using abstract images, because in the 60s there'd been an awful lot of prisms and patterns and wet slides with with blow lamps over them and all of that bubbly stuff that we all remembered, and I'd got very bored with it all, and I really wanted the images that were used in the show to express the same thing or to help to express the ideas and thoughts and feelings that the songs were attempting to express. And so that's why when we came on to Dark Side of the Moon, I started working with Peter Medak on shooting some material that hopefully expressed some of the feelings that were in the songs. Remember, in those days, people used to sit and certainly in our concerts, and listen to the whole thing. You could have heard a pin drop all the way through, because people didn't want to miss anything, and they really used to listen kind of carefully. These days are now gone. There's always several people who hoot and holler and whistle through everything, no matter what it is. A rather retrograde step, in my view. So they were interesting times, because it was very much at the beginning of rock and roll taking itself seriously. It wasn't that long after the Beatles had legitimized the whole thing, in a way, by starting to write their own songs.
David Gilmour recalls the early rehearsals and tours in early 1972 with Pink Floyd that served to allow their stage show to evolve into what would become Dark Side of the Moon.
We played 5 nights at the Rainbow Theatre in London, specifically sort of premiering this thing under the title of Eclipse, sort of way back in 72, long before it. So there was every opportunity for lots of people to hear it and lots of people to bootleg if that's what they wanted to do. But the benefits of actually playing it live on stage and us knowing the material well when we're in the studio, it's a very, very rare thing for anyone to know their material well when they're recording it, because you've only just written it. And I think Dark Side of the Moon definitely benefited an awful lot from the amount of time we'd played it on stage before recording it. Us and Them was a piece of Rick's piano piece that we initially we had in 1969, funnily enough, and we were going to put on the film Zabriskie Point by Antonioni over a riot at UCLA scene. It seemed to fit remarkably well, all this rioting and heads being banged by police in slow motion with that music. But Antonioni, we're very thankful to him, but turned it down, and we still had it around when we were making Dark Side of the Moon. And there it was.
And in the end, it's only round and round, round and round, 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 round. Haven't you heard? It's a battle of words. Most of them are alive. Listen, son, said the man with the gun. There's room for you inside.
Then they're going to kill you. So, like, if you give them a quick, short, sharp shock, they don't do it again. Dig it. I mean, he got off like, because I could have given him a fraction, like, hit him once. So the difference in right how long it is. I mean, good manners don't cost nothing, do they? Hey. Down, 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 and out. It can't be helped that there's a lot of it about. Without. And who'll deny it's what the fighting's all about? Out of the way, it's a busy day. I've got things on my mind. The word of the price of tea in the slice will be all my life.
That's Us and Them, featuring David Gilmour on vocal and Dick Perry on saxophone. Roger Waters recalls the pre-Dark Side of the Moon stage show evolution of Eclipse.
It's interesting that it was called Eclipse, and I'll tell you why. Because I can remember going to do a gig at the Colston Hall in Bristol and arriving in the afternoon having written a new piece for the piece, if you see it. So maybe I wrote a piece called Eclipse. And I can tell you when the piece Eclipse was first performed, because it was that day, if anybody cares to look up the history, and it was in the Colston Hall in Bristol. And I remember arriving with this new thing and saying, here, look, I think I've found an ending for it all. And it goes like this: all that you touch and all that you see and all you taste, all you feel, and all of that. And I said, this is, so now here is the end of the piece.
There were sounds on Dark Side of the Moon like nothing that had ever been heard on a rock album before. Some of these sounds were made by an instrument called a VCS-3. Once again, Roger Waters.
it was a synthesizer that was invented and manufactured by a man called Peter Zinoviev, and it was called the Putney VCS3 because he lived in Putney. And it was just a bank of three or four oscillators that generated sine wave and square wave and sawtooth wave signals, and which you could program through a ring modulator or a series of filters or a simple envelope generator in different combinations. And that's all it is, but it produces... I still use mine. Yeah, whenever you hear a kind of deep noise on one of my records, it's the Putney, because it does that beautifully. And also, if ever you hear wind, if you ever hear any of that wind noise on one of my records, that's the Putney as well, because it does that very well too. They then produced a thing called a Synthi A, which was the same electronics, but it had one of the very first sequences in it. And if you watch Pink Floyd at Pompeii carefully, in one small shot, you will see me producing on the run, out of a thing that looks like a little black suitcase. And that's the Synthi A. And so whenever Pink Floyd at Pompeii was shot, and I'm not sure when those sessions in Abbey Road were shot, but that must have been the time that we were doing On the Run, because it's actually on film with me twiddling the knobs to make the sequence that we actually used. And it was the space that was allowed the running footsteps, that were done in a tunnel. There's a tunnel underneath the Cromwell Road in London that runs from the Science Museum to South Kensington Tube Station. And it's long, it's about half a mile long, and it's lined with white ceramic tiles. If you get somebody in, a pair of leather shoes running in it, it sounds great, which is what's on the record as well.
That's called On the Run, from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I'm Redbeard. One of the most fascinating things about Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon is the madcap laughter and intriguing statements that, at first listen, seem disconnected. But Roger Waters had a brilliant plan.
I wanted to use human voices, looped or straight, on the background of the record, because it was supposed to be about, generally speaking, about human experience. So I came up with this idea, which I did, and that was to write a series of questions on index cards. I wanted to interview people, but without being in the room, so that all you got was their voice recorded very clean, A, and B, so that they were put in a situation where they had to respond to something. So what it was a series of cards, and it said things like, the first card said, what is your favorite color? And the second, so there were a series, and then when you'd answered the question on the first card, you removed the first card and moved on to the second card. So in the middle of about 30 questions, a number of different people came into the studio, and I recorded their answers, were things like, when was the last time you were violent? See? And then they'd move on to the next card, and it said, do you think you were in the right? You see, and then the next card had another question, and then the final cards would say, what does the phrase Dark Side of the Moon mean to you? And so there were about 30 questions, and we did everybody that we could get hold of that was anywhere near the studio. For instance, the guy who says, I don't know, I was really drunk at the time, that's Henry McCulloch. Because, he was making an album, a Wings album, I think, with Paul McCartney, who was in the studio down the hall. And Paul did it as well, but his stuff was unusable because he was performing, He finds it really hard to switch off. He's got to be, wisecracking and charming. The guy who says, he got off light, I only hit him once and I could have given him a thrashing, is a roadie that we had at the time called Roger the Hat, who tells us a story about how he was driving in the van and somebody cuts him up and he pulls off the road. Well, that was in answer to the... Then the guy who goes, I've been mad for 14 years, and also says, yes, I was in the right, definitely in the right, is a guy who was a roadie of ours also at the time called Chris Adamson, who then went on and ran a sound company. And I ran into him a couple of years ago, and he runs a big sound company now. The guy who goes, there is no dark side of the moon, really, it's all dark, was the doorman at Abbey Road Studios, and his name was Jerry. He came in and did that, and the guy who laughs, I like it, and who's in Eclipse at the end, you know, and whose laughter is looped, was our road manager for many years, a lovely guy. His name was Peter Watts, and but unfortunately he became a junkie and he OD'd about 15 years ago, and they say he's been dead for a long time.
Dark Side of the Moon's most famous song had a humble beginning, according to Waters.
I had a little studio at the bottom of my garden, very little, with a couple of Revoxes in it. And it was in there that I started fiddling about cutting up tape and made the... And my wife at the time was a potter, and she had an industrial food mixer she used to mix clay in, and I remember recording, throwing coins into it and ripping up bits of paper, and then I got a cash register from an old sound effects record and made up the 7/8 rhythm track that became money. Having said that, I made the tape up after I'd written the bass riff. So I knew what the bass riff was, and then I counted the beats and I realised it was in 7/8. And so then I made up this loop. And that was the beginning of all of that. And also I made all the clock stuff in there as well. But the money tape I did at the bottom of the garden in the shed. Just on 1/4-inch tape, and it was a 15 IPS machine, so in order for it to be a bar, the thing was about 8 feet long, I suppose. And so it would go, through the heads of the machine and round a couple of mic stands out in the room and then back into the machine again. And I copied that off then onto another machine, and then demoed the song against that tape. But we always used it when we recorded it for real later. We used that tape.
say is the root of all evil today. But if you ask for a rise, it's no surprise that they're giving none away.
Yes, absolutely right. I certainly was in the right.
Yes, definitely. I guess he was cruising for bruising.
I don't know, I was really drunk at the time.
You just told me it was a moving to number 2. You're asking why it doesn't come up on 3011.
That's Money from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album. I'm Redbeard. When we come back in the studio, you'll discover how that song changed everything for Pink Floyd after a momentous meeting in Nick Mason's kitchen. It's the 20th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon in the studio.
This is Roger Waters in the studio for the 20th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon.
And I'm Redbeard. Welcome back. The bits and pieces of Pink Floyd's new material from their 1972 stage show Eclipse coalesced into a fascinating concept for an entire album. The defining moment came during a band meeting in a most inauspicious location, drummer Nick Mason's kitchen. Here's Roger Waters.
I remember the room quite well. It was in, he had a big semi-detached house off Camden Road at that point. I can see the kitchen as if it was yesterday, and I think it was in that kitchen. I can't remember who was there, whether it was just Nick or whether Dave or Rick were there as well. I know Nick was there. Maybe we were all there. And I think it was at a meeting in that kitchen that I explained my idea for what the record should be about and how it might work conceptually, and how it really ought to be about our lives, how our lives really could be seen as a microcosm of the lives of every man. All the different things, like fear and love and hope and anxiety and hatred and pain and religion and authority, and that impinged upon our lives at the time and had done through our childhoods, and that somehow that could be turned into a record that was about the potential that we have for being human and humane and fulfilling our potential as human beings, but that that potential is eclipsed often by negativity.
And I am not frightened of dying. Any time will do, I don't mind. Why should I be frightened of dying? There's no reason for it. You've got to go sometime.
Rick Wright's composition Great Gig in the Sky from Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. For all of the admitted improvement in Roger's lyrics on Dark Side of the Moon, there's one of the most powerful vocals in rock on a song without any words at all. Roger Waters recalls the remarkable singer.
Claire Torrey, who it was, who I know very well because up until recently we lived just around the corner from each other in Richmond in London, and so I would see her all the time walking the dog. She had a lovely white bull terrier. But she had worked on sessions that Alan Parsons had been on. She's a fantastic performer. In fact, I think when I did the Pros and Cons tour, for fun, really, and for old time's sake, I flew her out to New York, and she did, she sang Great Gig in the Sky in Madison Square Gardens, which was terrific. And then she came and did it in Wembley Arena as well, which was really good. I really enjoyed that.
Much has been made over the last 20 years about the fantastic sound and production on Dark Side of the Moon. Many have noted that Alan Parsons engineered the recording and Chris Thomas did the mixdown. But Roger Waters thinks the material was even more important than the personnel.
I think it comes out of the songs, to be honest with you. I think it's because if you allow the narrative and the feeling and the meaning and the sense of the song to be the most important thing, it inevitably creates space. And it's the space that is important, I think. It's the space on the record that makes it sound hi-fi. I.e., there's a bass on the beginning of Time where I'm pressing a string down onto the pickup and it's going donk 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 donk. If that's all that's happening, and then there's a Putney VCS3 in the background making a very low note and rototoms over the top, because they're all in very different frequency ranges, the space that's around it allows it to sound hi-fi, i.e. there's not a rhythm guitar strumming and an organ filling up the whole spectrum. And so individual sounds are allowed to sound clean and clear on their own.
David Gilmour remembers Pink Floyd's anticipation when Dark Side was done.
I don't know about the staff and I don't know about the engineers and people and what they thought. But certainly we knew we were onto something good. I mean, and of course we were working quite late on, working on the cover. Certainly we knew long before it was released that we'd got something that was so superior as an overall thing to anything we'd done before. We knew that, yeah. I mean, we thought we would do a lot better business with it than we'd done on anything previously. But I mean, obviously, as we'd never sold more than about 200,000, I don't think we'd got above about 35 in the American charts, album charts before then. We knew we'd go a lot further. I had a bet with Steve, actually, O'Rourke, our manager, about whether it would get into the top 10 or not. I bet that it wouldn't get into the top 10 albums, and Steve bet that it would, and he won. But I won anyway.
got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun.
That's Time from The Dark Side of the Moon, an album which changed things for Pink Floyd almost immediately. Here's David Gilmour.
The single, Money, which went to number 10, I think, in the charts, that was the thing that seemed to change it more than anything else, was this single. Because before then, like I told you before, we were touring all over the States, selling out these big places, 10, 12, up to 15,000 people. And they would sit there absolutely silent and clap at the end. We could do all sorts of things with very quiet little quadraphonic effects and stuff, and you could hear a pin drop at our shows, so it was fantastic. There'd be no one shouting and no one, it's like that was wonderful in its way. And after that single, that tour was a bit of a nightmare for all of us in some ways, because it was wonderful to have all those people, but from that moment on to this day, they never stopped shouting and making a lot of noise. I can just remember we'd sit up on stage in these places and look at each other going, Jesus Christ, when are they ever going to stop? And every kid shouting, money, play money, play money. all the way through from beginning to end, and it was unbelievable. It really was. It was a shock. It was a big shock, and that's changed our music. Some of the little things that we used to do that were incredibly quiet and subtle, little things that the audience would be sitting there listening. All these things going on around, total silence. We had to really cut some of that stuff out. It just became impossible, literally. You know, there's no point in doing things that people can't hear. And if that racket's going on, I'm sure that's changed the shape of our music to a certain extent. It's a shame in a way, but you know, it swings and roundabouts. You gain a lot, you lose a little bit, you know.
David Gilmour and Nick Mason of Pink Floyd talk about the long-term effects of superstar success brought on by Dark Side of the Moon.
It was a very difficult period for us, I have to say. All your childhood dreams had been sort of realised. We'd had the biggest selling record in the world, and we had made money, and all the things that you got into it for, the girls and the money and the fame and all that stuff, was all... Sorry, Nick, he's looking terribly embarrassed. Everything had come our way, and you had to reassess what you were in it for thereafter, and it was a pretty confusing and sort of empty time for a while.
There's perhaps a feeling that once you've had the big hit album, the next one should roll off a little easier. And in fact, like so many things, each rung of the ladder is equidistant, and it's just as difficult to make the next album as it was the one before.
Harder. It was just, you know, the pressure of following something like Dark Side of the Moon. You try it one day. Yeah, you just try it. You try following Dark Side of the Moon one day.
We still are.
The vantage point afforded by 20-year hindsight has given Roger Waters 20/20 vision when it comes to the impact of Dark Side of the Moon.
I know that rock and roll has some impact because I get the letters, you know. And when I get the letters, it makes me happy. From an audience point of view, I know it's a good way of communicating human feelings to other people, because you know, I went out a couple of weeks ago and bought Harvest Moon, and I've been playing it constantly ever since. You know, and when I listen to Harvest Moon and I look at the body of Neil Young's work over the years, I'm just kind of really glad that this genre exists and that there are people of that kind of quality and depth creating stuff in spite of all the changing fads and fashions. And it gives me a little kind of tingle of satisfaction down my spine to know that some people look upon me in the same way that I look upon him or John Lennon. If Dark Side of the Moon is one of those records that helps people to discover and cling to their humanity, well, then it deserves to last, you know, 1,000 years.
The lunatic is on the grass. The lunatic is on the grass, remembering games and daisy chains and laughs. Got to keep the loonies on the path. The lunatic is in the hall. The lunatics are in my hall. The paper holds their folded faces to the floor, and every day the paper boy brings more. And if the dam breaks open many years too soon, and if there is no room upon the hill, and if your head explodes without the bones too, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. my head. You raise the blade, you make the change, you rearrange me till I'm sane. You lock the door and throw away the key. There's someone in my head, but it's not me. And if the cloud bursts, thunder in your ear, you shout and no one seems to hear. And if the band you're in starts playing different tunes, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. Taste all you feel, and all that you love, and all that you hate, all you distrust, all you save, and all that you give, and all that you deal, and all that you buy, beg, borrow or steal, and all you create, and all you destroy. And all that you do, and all that you say, and all that you eat, and everyone you meet, and all that you slight, and everyone you fight, and all that is now, and all that is gone, and all that's to come, and everything under the sun is in June. And the sun is eclipsed by the moon.
We'll be right back in the studio after this.
There is no dark side in the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all dark.
We hope you've enjoyed this 20th anniversary edition of In the Studio for Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Special thanks to Roger Waters, Mark Fenwick at EG Management, Jim Del Balzo at Sony Columbia Music, to David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Steve O'Rourke. This edition of In the Studio was written and produced by yours truly, Redbeard, with introduction by Joe Rhodes. Post-production and then some by Rick R.J. Lang. The executive producer of In the Studio is Stephen R. Smith.